have led to success with her consulting firm, GrantsGalore. She's been a workshop facilitator, a trainer, and a grant writing specialist for many nonprofits and governmental units. Kristin's also a past member of our Springfield branch. So welcome to join us now, Kristin.
Thank you, Marcia. We appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. Let me go ahead and share my screen. In presentation mode. All right. And I'm hoping that either Kate or Elaine will monitor the chat for me. And we talked about typing questions into the chat, and then they will monitor those and let me know if there are questions along the way. Otherwise, maybe we'll have some time at the end. And I'm going to start the clock now. I'm going to try to finish up around 10 minutes after 12, if that's all right. Okay. And also, I will make these slides available in a PDF format. I think they're going to email them out after the meeting today, so they will be available. One of the things about fundraising is that people need to know if their contribution is charitable deduction or not. And so I just want to make sure that you know up front if your organization can offer that tax status. So most chapters are structured as a 501c4 in the eyes of the IRS, which means you have nonprofit status, but it's not, your main purpose is not charitable. It's the C4 designation allows you to engage in advocacy and lobbying. And so contributions to your chapter are not tax deductible. I understand that some chapters have an educational foundation associated with it, which is structured as a 501c3, and the IRS, that is the classification for a charitable nonprofit organization. So any contributions to a 501c3 are tax deductible. So be sure before you start asking people for money, make sure you know your tax status, and then on the next slide, I'll explain ways that you can provide that charitable contribution deduction if you are not a 501c3. Pausing to see if we have any questions. So I looked at AAUW national policy regarding scholarships, and I have the link there on the left. If you are not familiar with this, you can read about it in depth. Rather than provide the whole text for you, I just lifted out the highlights. And so there are 4 ways that people can donate to AAUW scholarships. The first is that if you have your own 501c3 status, then you can collect money for scholarships directly. The other way is for you to collect donations and pass it through to AAUW National for their scholarship program. And then that would be tax deductible through National. Another way is for donors to give directly to a scholarship established at a college or university in AAUW's name. And so people can give directly to that scholarship fund. And so the 501c3 would be through the college or university itself. And then the other way would be for you to take donations and then pass them through to the college or university through the chapter. So my notes for you here are that however you go about this, make sure that you acknowledge any donations. And so if you have the 501c3 status, you acknowledge that donation as a chapter. If you pass it through to National, it would be nice for you to acknowledge that donation as a chapter, but then I'm assuming that the National also acknowledges receipt of that donation. The college or university will definitely acknowledge it if they're given to them directly. And then for number 4, if you pass through donations to the college, you need to acknowledge it yourself as a chapter, and then I'm sure the college will acknowledge it as well. But people who want charitable deduction for their tax return need some sort of written acknowledgement of that donation. Last spring, those of you who attended the meeting, the spring meeting, were surveyed about fundraising activities that you take part in. And so I created a pie chart just to show the responses that you gave. About 2/3 of your efforts are involved in sales, selling products, selling items, and special events. And then about 1/4 or 1/5 are just direct donations, and then the remaining are divided between raffles that you have, and then sending letters out asking for donations by direct mail. I'll just pause here and give you a couple minutes to soak that in. Again, almost half of your fundraising is by items that you're selling through your chapter, and then another almost 1/4 through special events. Now, the top 5 fundraising strategies are direct mail. I'm just going to go through these quickly, and then we'll come back and revisit them later. And then actually, once you have a donor, then donor retention efforts, trying to get them to give more than once. Major or legacy gifts, which would be estate planning or capital grants, not grants, capital donations, really large scale gifts. Online social fundraising is another strategy that has grown in the last, I'd say less than a decade. It's really blossomed. And then grant seeking also is another effective strategy for that. And I'm trying to focus on fundraising for scholarships specifically. So let me ask you this. What do you notice is not listed in these top 5? I see some smiles there. You don't see sales, and you don't see special events. And that's because they're so labor intensive. So let me show you this graphic. This is what I call a dual continuum. And on the continuum on the left here, the typical cost of fundraising lists the types of fundraising strategies from low to high in terms of costs that you would incur to do that type of fundraising. So the planned giving, the major gifts, that has very little cost associated with the actual fundraising. And then you move up the continuum here to direct marketing. For instance, if you purchased a mailing list, or if you purchased ads or things like that, that would be a high cost for your fundraising. And then on this side, we have dependency, which is how much you rely on that type of fundraising to fund your budget, to fund your scholarships. And so planned giving, that would be significant gifts. So that would be high dependency. That's what you would really want to focus on. Those would be those reliable gifts that you can count on, especially if it's an endowed scholarship. It's already a planned gift, or a major gift would help you establish that endowment so that you wouldn't have to keep doing fundraising over and over. And so this goes down, I say up the continuum, but it's from high dependency to low dependency, where you can't rely on the direct marketing. It's you need to ask people for donations, but you're not going to rely on that because it could depend on from season to season. It could vary from year to year. You just never know how people are going to respond. For instance, I'll point out that with grant seeking, when we went through the hurricanes, the forest fires, the racial equity, I saw a major shift in funders. They totally abandoned what they had been funding, and they focused solely on those specific issues. And then, of course, the pandemic as well, recovery from the pandemic. So you just never know how the tide is going to turn with some of these strategies. But if you have someone who's really dedicated to your scholarships, that they would give a major gift, then that is much more reliable than these other strategies that might vary with the time of year or whatever's going on in society. So let's revisit this list. And again, thinking about the sales and the special events. So there is a place for those. And so when you think about those strategies not being in the top 5, I want you to think about what return on investment you're getting from your sales and from your special events, your raffles. If those are effective fundraising strategies for you, then of course, keep doing them. But if you're just doing them because that's all you've ever done, or if you're doing them because they're fun, but they're not necessarily getting you the money that you need, you may want to balance those cost benefits. For instance, I know there are some that have had book sales that are just getting to the point where it's not feasible, it's so labor intensive, the storage aspect of it, moving things back and forth. I know that one chapter went to, I think, an online book sale, or someone else suggested in that survey maybe a drive-by book sale. You know, there are different ways that you can modify what you've already been doing. Just think about where it would fit into this continuum and just decide, is it really worth continuing, or is it time to find another strategy? So just thinking about the benefits that you might get from an event or from your sales. If it's supporting a local business, like your plant sales, if that supports a local business, then that has a positive aspect to it. It also gives you visibility in the community. There might be a friend-raising aspect to what you're doing, like with your special events. Maybe it's important that you get more people, you meet more people face-to-face, and that's a benefit to you. So even though it might be labor-intensive, it's fun, there's a social aspect to it, and there are other benefits that even though it may not be the best return on your investment for a fundraising strategy, it still has some benefits to it. So think about that. Let's see. Oh, and I'll come back to the next point I was going to make. So going back to, now I'm going to dig in a little bit to each one of these. If you're going to rely on direct mail for your fundraising, it's what I call an annual letter campaign or an annual giving campaign. It's something that you do every year so that your donors, the people in the community, are looking for it, they're anticipating it, something that they know is coming every year. Some tasks that you'll need to do is to compile your lists, and I suggest that you start with friends and family, and then as you have your special events or other opportunities to gather information, you should take, I'm not dictating to you, every event, every time you interact with people, that is an opportunity for you to gather information to build your list every time you meet with people. Now, if you collect information, like if you have a sign-up sheet that they're interested in receiving information about AAUW, you need to make sure that you have permission to contact them for fundraising purposes. So that could just be a tacit okay on the sheet, that when they sign this, if they don't check the box that says they do not want to be contacted, that's tacit approval. That would be the easiest way for you to get the information. You give them a way to opt out of being contacted later. That's called tacit permission. You can also acquire mailing lists. I understand that there are possibly existing mailing lists that AAUW already has. I don't know how, if you all have access to that, but you can also acquire mailing lists locally. And again, I'm not a fundraising expert, but I know that that is possible for you to be able to do that. Just depends on what your purpose is for fundraising. If that's important to you to have a broad mailing list, like to all the households in a specific zip code, for instance, that would be one way to do that. And then something else to think about when you're planning your letter campaign is the time of year. Most charities send their letters out between Thanksgiving and Christmas, or between Thanksgiving and December 31st, because that's when most people give to charities, because they're trying to build up their charitable deductions for their tax return. So anybody who wants to try to get a last minute donation in there, that's a prime window for you. And Giving Tuesday is the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, I believe. So that's one that a lot of charities have started focusing on, is really getting the word out that they're collecting donations on Giving Tuesday. You might have community-specific dates or chapter-specific dates that would make sense for you to do a letter campaign around. I don't know if there would be a community-wide focus on charities, local charities perhaps, or something about supporting women and girls in your community, that might be a good way to tie into that, to request donations for your scholarship fund around that time. And then something else I checked into is Cooter.com. They list national observances. Some of the ones I came up with are Random Acts of Kindness Week, the week of, it's usually around February 14th, Valentine's Day. There's Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day, the last week in February. And these may vary by year. The one in 2021 was February 25th. The whole month of February is set aside as Financial Aid Awareness Month, where people can learn about financial aid that's available, scholarships, internships, things like that. That might be a way to tie into that. May 1st is National College Decision Day. So that might be another natural day to tie in with, to time your letter, to send your letter out around that time. August 26th was Women's Equality Day this year. So that's something that would happen every year around that time. And then the whole month of November is National Scholarship Month. So those are just some examples of days that you might tie into when you're planning your letter campaign, that you could dovetail with something that's already out there. If you do have an event, it's a nice way to keep those donors coming back, to keep them engaged, either at future events or in other things that your chapter is doing, especially the scholarship fund. And that's just to follow up with them. If you have contact information that you gathered at the event, you can just do a three question survey. There's really cheap and sometimes free surveys that you can do. That's like Doodle.com is a really easy poll that you can send out if you have their email address. Like, ask them 3 questions, like how did you find out about the event? What aspects of the event did you like, and would you attend again? Something like that. First of all, you're gathering information that you can use to decide if the way you were promoting the event worked or not. That's one way that you're using that survey. Also, you're keeping them engaged. You're reminding them that they were actually there and that you remember that they were there. And also you're testing their email to see if it's actually valid. There are lots of ways that these follow-up questions can help you with your future fundraising events. Let's see. Thank you, donors. Make sure that you thank them at least once. And it's also nice if 6 months later you remind them, we really appreciate the donation you made back in October. Thank you so much for that, and we hope that you will consider blah, 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 and give them a heads up about what's coming up. But make sure it's meaningful, and sometimes that requires some information gathering as well. How do they prefer to be thanked? If there's a way to find that out, then you try to use those strategies. You want to make it meaningful for them. And one of the ways that you can make it meaningful is to have the actual scholarship recipients thank the donors directly. That's such a heartwarming thing to get a letter from a scholarship recipient that they can tell their own story. They can thank the person themselves. And speaking of storytelling, DEI, you've been doing that. That's what AUW does. And so tell your story. What are you doing? Make sure that people in the community understand how you support women and girls in the community, and how, not just through scholarships, but all the ways. Tell your story so that people will, when they see AAUW, they will link it with the work that you're doing. And tell your story as many different ways as you can and as often as you can. And part of that story is telling who benefited from the scholarships and how they benefited. Tell those impact stories. You know, people want to know that they're making a difference, that their dollar is changing lives. And so your storytelling will help you do that. Will help them know how they made a difference. Those major gifts, we talked about that graphic where the major gifts were at the bottom for high dependency. That's because on average, only 10 to 20% of the donors support 80 to 90% of a nonprofit's fundraising. If you're relying on those big gifts, that's usually how that plays out. So there is a whole science behind planned giving. And so I suggest that if you are going to pursue this, for instance, if you want to do a capital campaign to endow your scholarship and just get it done, get it endowed so that you don't have to fundraise year after year. If you're going to take that approach, I recommend that you consult with your local chapter of Association of Fundraising Professionals. Association of Fundraising Professionals. I know Springfield has a chapter, and I'm sure there are other chapters in the major cities throughout the state. But that would be one way to tap into their expertise and just go ahead and get a really good capital campaign going, get those legacy gifts or those major gifts in place. And my 2 tips for you, if you're not going to go through a professional fundraiser, is to take some time. The science of it is to identify and cultivate those donors and what level you think they can give at, and then ask for that amount. I keep using the word science, but there is a whole science behind this type of fundraising, and it's very calculated, lots of homework, lots of interviews with key stakeholders, people who know people, and how much they think they would be willing to give, how much they're able to give. Those are 2 separate questions. So if you're interested in something like this to endow your scholarships, then you need to put some time into it and really educate yourselves about how to go about that. The online social fundraising, I admit I am not on Facebook, I am not on Instagram, but I know that they are very, very effective strategies, especially since COVID and everything is going online. I know that there's something called GoFundMe, and there are other lookalikes that have popped up in the past few years that are similar to that. I cannot speak to them myself through direct experience, but I know that they're out there. And so if you're going to do something like a GoFundMe or something similar to that, educate yourself, know what you're getting into. For instance, I've heard that if you don't meet your goal amount, then you don't get to keep the money that you have raised. So you need to be strategic about how you set your goal, and just make sure you read the fine print so you know what you're committing to and what happens if you don't meet your goal, things like that. And then social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. There's something called TikTok. I've heard of it. I don't know if it would be appropriate for fundraising, but if you're doing friend raising, that might be a possibility. And also make sure that you are interacting, that you're using the social media platforms, that the people that you're wanting to target, that your potential donors, make sure that you're using the platforms that they use. And so again, that's going to take some information gathering. You know, when you're at an event, chat them up. You know, Are you on Facebook? Are you on Instagram? Find out what they're using. And then, of course, don't just focus on one thing. Try to diversify and use multiple channels. My tips about engaging people online is be social. Post things that are going on, respond to other people's posts, issue invitations, interact with people. Ask them questions. This is another way that you can gather information. Ask them about their preferences, ask them what their concerns are. There's one podcast host named Sam Sanders. He has a podcast name called It's Been a Minute, and he ends every show with recordings. People call in and tell him the best part of their week. And so if you have something like that people can just share the best thing that happened to them that week, people are going to come back and visit that site because they want to find out what other people are talking about. And then you can also lift up those stories when you have a chance, just to lift up something positive to show that you're paying attention to what people are saying. And then again, tell your impact stories. How are people you're serving, how are they benefiting from your scholarships? One of my tips a little bit later on, people give to people. And so you want to make those connections all the time. Of course, being on social media requires a skill set. And so if your chapter, if no one in your chapter has that skill set, then reach out to family members, to your local colleges, maybe have an internship. I don't know if there'd be a statewide AAUW internship that you could have someone that could provide support to the local chapters. I'm trying to think of different ways that you could get those skill sets. Maybe just create an office for your chapter, a dedicated position for social media that could handle your website. If you don't already have a dedicated position, we need to be thinking about how to engage with this, because I think we're not going back. I think that social platforms, being online, is how we're going to continue to reach people. I noticed that in the poll that the results were sent out yesterday, that a lot of the concerns about how you gain members and how you get younger members. And I think if you don't have an online presence, whether it's fundraising or friend raising, I think we're missing out. So just some things that I thought of when I was putting together. Grant seeking. If you haven't sought grants for your chapter yet, for your chapter in the past for scholarships, I suggest that you start small and get your feet wet. Start local, because people already know you. Local organizations, local residents, they know, like your community foundation, that would be a local grant. United Way, I don't know if they would fund scholarships. There may be local giving circles. Women, I know that the Community Foundation in Springfield has a giving circle, Women Giving to Women. And so that would be an excellent resource for AAUW scholarships. And my advice to all people who are seeking grants is that you make sure that you find the best fit. Just because there's money out there doesn't mean it's the best fit for what you're looking for. And so it takes a little homework on your part just to find the grant makers that are going to be interested in what you're doing, and that you can apply to them and have and not have it be labor intensive. There's some grant applications that take so much time that you have to, again, consider your return on investment and how much time you have to devote to that. But grant seeking is one way to fund your scholarships. Just a few tips, and then we'll see what questions there are. Again, people give to people, but you have to ask them. You're not just going to give until you ask them. And then when you do ask, focus on one call to action. Are you asking them to give for the first time? Are you asking them to donate either their cash or maybe items for a silent auction? Or are you asking them to renew their donation? So focus on one call to action and So there might be a group that you want to have a call to action to give for the first time, and then there be another group that you want to focus on renewing. And so those are two separate strategies. And don't mix up other calls to action with your fundraising call to action. I know you want them to vote. I know you want them to visit a website or to visit their college, perhaps. You want them to learn about certain topics. You want them to be informed, but keep those calls to action separate from the fundraising. And then it's always helpful if you suggest giving levels, like with your letter campaign. You've seen those cards where it has a little box that you can check if there's a certain giving level that you want to suggest. Give people a place to start, and then they can always decide if they want to give more or less, but at least you have a suggestion for where to start. When you're collecting information, keep it to the basics. What do you need to know about them to be able to process their payment and to be able to contact them again in the future? Just limit it to that. Don't ask for other information that really has nothing to do with their donation, because they may not give you any information. If you're asking for too much, if you're asking for stuff that's not related, they may decide not to even give you their contact information. So keep in mind what you're asking and the purpose of it. If it doesn't serve a purpose for fundraising, then save it for another time. When you're sending letters, if you send letters, I recommend that you hand address them, that you hand sign the letters in blue ink. That shows that it's not just a form letter, it's not a photocopy. And the science behind direct mail, direct marketing, is that people will open letters addressed in handwritten envelopes. That gets envelopes opened more than just a mailing label. And then if you're doing any sorts of fundraising, you really, whether it's what I've talked about or whether it's what you've been doing, you need to track your results. You need to know if what you're doing is meeting your need. And then whatever those results are, then you use that to inform the next time. If something didn't go quite right, you want to ask yourself, is it because there was something specific that happened this time? Was it raining that day? You know, did people not come out? Whatever the reason is, you have to think about why, and then decide if you're going to change anything because of that reason, or if you're just going to go ahead and repeat what you did before because it was a blip. Just don't know. All right, I have about used up my time. I included a slide there that has all the resources that I use to inform my my presentation. So if you want to learn more about it, you'll have the URLs when you get the slides. And then I'm just going to pause here and see what questions we have.
There is one question that has to do with people who are colorblind. Have you ever run into that as a problem when you're hand addressing with blue ink?
I haven't looked into it. No.
So that's rare. That's good to know. And the other question is about the possibility on the state level, perhaps we could share an account at Boomerang, and that's something for us to consider on the state level. I think you've given us so much detail that I'm not seeing any other questions.
Okay.
I actually just had a comment. This is Tracy from Aurora. That the people to people donations, it is good. However, I volunteered for years for an animal rescue, and the woman raising the funds, it was only people she knew. So when she left the organization, all of our funding was gone.
Oh no.
So, I mean, you have like the sustaining membership obviously is important, and that's clearly something they didn't do, but that's just something to think about. You know, you can't be tied to one person.
Yeah, it has to be the organization, not just the one leader. Yeah. Thank you,
but
Tracy.
it also
Kristin, this has been wonderful. We are very grateful for your interesting and extremely informative and useful information for us. So thank you so much for that.